Hello, everyone. Eric here, and I'm kind of just getting out of the shower, and I had some thoughts that I think are very relevant, very important. Now, this video is a defense of certain forms of pseudoscience, like astrology and tarot. I'm also going to include things like Myers-Briggs and spiral dynamics in here. Um, like there's some science behind these, but for the purposes of this video, I'm going to cast a wide net and go ahead and include them as being pseudoscience, even though they're, you could ostensibly debate them a little more than you could like astrology or whatnot. But that's not of interest to us. We're going to assume that those are pseudosciences. And what I want to do is defend these certain forms of pseudoscience today. This comes from a conversation I was having after I released my video on spiral dynamics and kind of my take on it. Um, I, the first criticism I got was that this is pseudoscientific. Well, I'm not going to argue that point. Perhaps it is. But what I want to do here, and why I think this is important, is this is a realization or like an argument I came up with um, probably a few years ago, and I wanted to get it out there. So, what is pseudoscience? Pseudoscience, just to give you an intuition on it for those that don't have such an intuition, it's basically a theory or a way of looking at the world that sort of looks like science, sort of acts like science in some ways. It gives you the appearance of being science, but it's really not. It's um, it's not really amenable to any sort of empirical correction. So there's been several critiques of pseudoscience mostly throughout the late 19th century and into the 20th century. I'll name a few. So one prominent one might be Kuhn, who's uh, who wants to examine science through a historical lens, and he notes that science goes through revolutions quite often, and basically what like a big part of what science does is that it takes things as far as it can go within a certain paradigm until observations start popping up that the paradigm doesn't correctly predict. And this gives us hints that, okay, something's wrong here. And now sometimes what's wrong is just a minor adjustment within the paradigm that we're already operating in. But sometimes, like with Einsteinian relativity, the old paradigm, which would have been Newton, classical physics, is just wrong on some kind of fundamental level. And so a major paradigm shift needs to occur in order for us to understand the phenomena that doesn't match. And by the way, the specific thing that didn't match was the orbit of Mercury. Like Newton's equations were off when it came to the orbit of Mercury, and this is because Mercury orbits the sun faster than any other planet. And so, because we didn't have an understanding of relativity, like special relativity in particular, what happened is we predicted Mercury would be here, but it's actually here, and so it was a little bit off because we didn't understand relativity. Well, Einstein came around and changed that for us. So a big part of what science is being amenable to communal correction. That when we have empirical observations, when we observe things in the world that are a little off, scientists work to fix that. They work to explain, okay, why are we off? Why are we wrong about this? Well, pseudoscience in general is not prone to such corrections. Like pseudoscience tends to thrive very much on confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is looking for where you're right. Well, this is perhaps the wrong way to go, according to another philosopher named Karl Popper, who came up with and I believe he won a Nobel Prize for his theory of falsification. What Popper basically came around and said is that something is not science if it cannot be falsified, and I want to be specific about this because Popper was only trying to define the demarcation, the line between what is science and what is not science. Okay, he wasn't saying that something is false or meaningless just because it wasn't empirically falsifiable. He was not saying that. That's what the next people I'm going to explain, the logical positivists, they try to make that extra leap, quite unsuccessfully, I might add. But Popper was just interested in what counts as science and what does not. So what does it mean for something to be falsifiable? Well, it means that there's some observation that you could make out in the world that prove you wrong. Like, there's really no set of observations. There's no like, I often talk about the problem of induction. It's a very common problem within the philosophy of science and epistemology in general. The problem basically goes something like, we sort of assume that the sun will rise tomorrow. And our proof for this is because, well, it's risen every day that we've been alive, and we have no reason to doubt that it won't rise again tomorrow. But as we all know, just because this is the way it's always been in the past doesn't mean this is the way it's going to be in the future. That, maybe a black hole enters our solar system, and well, there you go. Now the sun doesn't rise again tomorrow. So it just becomes highly probable that the sun will rise again tomorrow. And in fact, the sort of maybe slightly humorous example that sometimes is given is that the chicken would be very, very keen, would be very wise to question his inductive assumptions, because it might be days and weeks, months and years that every morning the farmer gives him the feed, but that doesn't mean that state of affairs is going to continue. And unfortunately for the poor chicken, his inductive assumptions turn out to be false, because one day the farmer is instead wringing his neck and frying him up on a frying pan. So no good for the chicken. So this problem of induction has been a very common one throughout science, a very interesting problem that a lot of people have tried to solve. Well, Popper solved this by saying, okay, well, maybe no. Well, he didn't solve the problem. He just demarcated what is science and what is not, based off of, is there any observation that could possibly prove us wrong? Well, the statement, the sun will rise again tomorrow, would be, you can prove that wrong by observing the morning. Sun doesn't come up. There you go. You're wrong. But it does. It seems to every morning, and probably will. It's highly probable it will for the foreseeable future. Well, then, like, what pseudoscience would be, according to Popper, is it would be a theory that is not falsifiable. And I think this is a very strong demarcation. I think Popper is really onto something here between what we do count as science and what we don't. So something like astrology is not really falsifiable. It's not really falsifiable, because there's no real empirical observation that you could make to prove something wrong, to prove a statement of astrology wrong. Something like, Jupiter is associated with rulership and having a big ego. How do you prove such a thing wrong? There's no falsifiability in that kind of statement. Or Mars is associated with war and probably masculinity and things of this nature. Well, how do you prove this wrong? There's no observation that you could make that would prove that statement incorrect. So it's not science, according to Popper. Well, then, I would say that you'll see this a lot in online debates, where people try to then take this into the realm of logical positivism, which was a whole movement back in the 1930s and 40s, I believe. I just recently read a significant portion of A.J. Ayer, and I've been trying to I've unsuccessfully had a couple attempts at making a video explaining what I read. Ayer's can be a little bit difficult reading, I will say. I'm not accustomed to the way he writes. So I've had difficulty understanding some of the things that he's said in his book, Language, Truth, and Logic, I believe. But I will be coming out with a video soon about it. I've already written it down. But anyways, AJ Iyer would be a strong proponent of logical positivism. Logical positivism is it takes Popper's falsifiability and really expands it quite a bit. I would say it's similar to Popper's falsifiability without being quite the same. What logical positivists want to say is that if there is no empirical observations that are relevant to a statement at all, then the statement is actually just meaningless. It's not a matter of whether it's science or not, and it's not just a matter of falsifiability either. Because Popper wants to say, well, if there's no statement that could prove you, or there's no empirical observation that could prove a statement wrong, then it's not science. The logical positivists want to expand this to both positive and negative. If there's no empirical observation that would prove your statement correct, or at least is relevant to proving your statement correct, um, or false, they include both, then it's meaningless. It's not that it's not just science, like Popper wants to say. It's even worse. Your statement is just completely meaningless, period, in the first place. Well, I'm not going to go over the I'm not going to go over the responses to logical positivism. You will see a lot of I want to say like naive materialism or naive scientism, like this sort of unsophisticated belief that where people sort of turn science into like a new religion or like a new metaphysics. Uh, I like the new atheist movement seems to have inspired a lot of these types of people. You'll see them are making very logical positivist type arguments. So it's everywhere on the internet. Well, logical positives, like I said, we're quite unsuccessful. I'm not going to go over the responses to it. Um, you can do that for yourself, but but they would definitely say that pseudoscience is going to include all these things, where all these theories like astrology, where there is just no empirical observations that are even relevant to proving the statement's true or false. So Mars is the planet Mars is associated with war and conflict and masculinity. The, there's just no set of observations that are relevant to proving that statement true or false. So logical positivists would say it's not just pseudoscience; it's just nonsense. It's meaningless. It has no linguistic influence at all. So, under these criteria, you can also see where people would classify things like Myers-Briggs or spiral dynamics. Like these would also be pseudoscientific enterprises because they fall under these same rubrics of having like how do you prove that the INFJ personality type tends to be very empathetic and whatnot. I mean, maybe you could kind of do that, but I don't know. Actually, that like that very statement does seem like you could maybe make some set of empirical observations to say that there's a correlation between people that test like this on the MBTI test. And I don't know, but yeah, maybe as an exercise to you guys as the viewers, you can maybe point out or struggle with this a little bit to see where the theories I've given you of Thomas Kuhn's historicism and Popper's falsifiability and the logical positivist verification principle maybe apply to things like MBTI and spiral dynamics as well. I'm sure they do, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because I wanted to get to the fun part. The fun part here is I want to actually provide a little bit of a defense of pseudoscience, and the defense that I have of it is that I think Kuhn and Popper and the logical positivists like Iyer, and maybe it may be some of these people online that want to just poo-poo all pseudoscience as being nonsense, as being worthless. I kind of want to respond to them, and the response I have to them is that it is very Wittgensteinian in its character here, because the defense I want to make is that you guys that are poo-pooing pseudoscience are playing a different language game than the people that are engaged in these pseudosciences. These are different language games. They're just different games altogether. Now, what do I mean by this? Um, like Wittgenstein, or at least the later Wittgenstein, is is known for his theory of language games, where he points out that there's no like static meaning of words out there. Like what a word means does not have one meaning. It's not static. Uh, it's not like the word female, for instance. The word female, very common one for people to debate in a lot of these political debates anymore. It doesn't have a single meaning. It doesn't have the single meaning of like a biological female of the biological female sex. It doesn't have that one static meaning. The word female is also associated with a whole bunch of other concepts and words. And in different contexts, like in a different language game, such as computers or electronics in general, it has maybe a little bit of a different meaning because a female connector for like electronics, it means something different. It doesn't mean the female biological sex. Like the male connector, if you can think of it like a plug. Like the male connector on a plug is the part that plugs into the female connector of like an outlet. Like your wall outlets would be female connectors. And when you plug in your a fan or plug in your computer or whatever, that's the male um, you know that's the male connector. Okay, so depending on the language game that you're playing, if we're playing this language game of talking about relationships, we're generally talking about the female, the female gender, the female gender role, the female sex even. And even that's not even always the case because even just within this one topic of relationships, there's all kinds of different language games people could be playing. They could be playing a political language game. They could be playing an actual giving advice type of language game. And these are kind of different. Like these are different contexts to talk about relationships in. So even then, even when the meanings of these of the word female, it seems like it would be sort of a little closer together than talking about a biological, human female versus a wall socket. These are very different meanings, very different language games for the same word. Even when they seem like they'd be sort of closer together, it's still not quite the same language game, according to Wittgenstein. So so for Wittgenstein, what he's pointing out is that the meanings of words change based off of these language games, and even their logical connections change depending on the language game that you're currently engaged with, and even language games can be very difficult to define. They can be very fuzzy, and so, I might be playing one language game and you're playing another, but because we're communicating in the same context, there might be conflict because I'm playing the language game that I'm playing correctly and you're playing it correctly according to you, but we don't realize that we're actually playing two different language games because we associate them with this uh, some context that we're in, but they're actually different. So this gets kind of complicated, as you can see, and human beings are remarkably intuitive about engaging in language games. Um, we just sort of engage in them automatically and sort of intuitively know the rules. Anyways, I'm saying all this because what I'm trying to what my ultimate defense here of pseudoscience is that the language game of science that people are engaged in of empirical observation and theory testing is just a whole different language game than what the tarot reader is engaging you with. Now, a part of Wittgenstein's theory of language here is that he recognized that all language is what A.J. Ayer would call use its definitions in use. Like Ayer made this distinction between definitions, explicit definitions, which is just when we define words in terms of other words. Uh, on the other hand, a definition in use is a definition of how the word is typically used. For example, I might try to define boardwalk specifically as the property that costs 400. It's in the dark blue group. It's the most expensive property. It's on position 40. These would be sort of explicit definitions of what boardwalk is. Whereas if I tried to define boardwalk in use, it would be something like it's the property I own Park Place, so it's the property I want to buy in order to put houses and hotels on and put you out of business. That'd be a very in use type of definition because I'm defining this thing in terms of how it's useful, in terms of how it's sort of pragmatic to the current game that we're playing. Okay. Now, what I want to the way I want to defend something like I'm going to use tarot as an example. Like I might have titled this video I don't know what I'm going to title it. I might have titled it, in defense of astrology. I might wind up titling it in defense of pseudoscience in general. But like you can just substitute all kinds of pseudosciences in here, and this defense works. Okay, so I'm going to use tarot as an example. When you sit down with the tarot reader, I think there's like you're playing a language game that I think actually has value. It actually has use. And the use that it has is that when you sit down and she reads your fortune, reads your tarot reading, what she's doing, and I'm using she because it's stereotypically a woman. It doesn't have to be a woman, but that's the stereotype. But she sits down and she does your tarot reading, and what she's doing is she's offering you an alternative means of seeing your current situation. Like the way that tarot works is it actually works off of some sort of confirmation bias. But it's not a confirmation bias that keeps you in your current belief set. Its whole purpose is for you to look at your current life or look at some current situation that you want to examine in a different way by using the archetypes that are present within tarot or even present within, say, MBTI or astrology. It's to offer you some sort of alternative perspective using a different like a an archetype of narratives. Okay, so when she sits down and she says, you have the it's been a long time since I've remembered anything about tarot, so bear with me. I might just be making up something that kind of sounds like tarot here, but at least I hope you get the example. She might say, "Oh, you have the oh, I know one. The tower reversed is like supposed to be the real bad one, like disaster. Tower reversed came up. Uh, that means that if you follow this path, great disaster could happen. Bad consequences, things that'll really crumble your worldview, and that's supposed to get you into shifting into this mindset of, oh, okay, how could my decision making, how could I, if I continue on this path, like how could I wind up ruining everything around me? How could I break down the entire structure of my life? How could it lead to that? And by doing so, you might see some problems with the way that you're currently approaching life, you know. And basically, what I'm saying is these a lot of these forms of pseudoscience is what they're doing is they're providing a new mythology, a new organizing principle. Like there are a lot of there are a lot of theologians and even metaphysicians throughout the 20th century and even more recently um, that that have come from a point of view that what metaphysics and myth and theology are about is about providing some sort of organizing principle, some sort of narrative through which to see and organize your view of life, to navigate your world in sort of this overarching way. I think one famous example would be Lorianne Paul, and I don't remember. I don't remember the exact phrase she uses. It might have been organizing principle. That's the phrase that I tend to like when thinking about this kind of stuff. So I'm just going to use that one. But the point is that what myth does, what metaphysics does, is it provides this overarching principle, this organizing principle through which to organize the way you navigate the world through. And I think what like things like astrology and tarot are doing is providing is like sitting down and saying, okay, here's a more concrete organizing principle through which we can view your current life, through which we can view the things that you're doing, and if we view them through this way, it might give you a new perspective. It might provoke new intuitions about how your life is going and how to organize things. So I think these different types of pseudoscience, I don't think they're really all that bad. No, they're not science. They're not meant to be science. What they're meant to be is a language game that someone that maybe is not wholly intellectual, that maybe like sitting down and reading all the research of personality psychology or something, just like it's just not something that they're really interested in engaging in, maybe not even capable of engaging in. Um, like that, like that's a whole different language game that's being played by people that are maybe a little more rigorous. But I think trying to apply the principles of that language game onto this language game that's maybe a little more accessible to people, and really is not about providing precise principles to make precise predictions about the positions of planets, or how a jet engine will react under these circumstances. That's not the language game they're playing. These are just people that are looking for, they're trying to play a language game of shifting their intuitions to think about life in a different way so that they can solve their own everyday problems. Now, now that I've sort of defended certain forms of pseudoscience, I do want to say that there are other forms of pseudoscience I am not defending. Creationism would be a form of pseudoscience I do not defend, or intelligent design. That one's a little trickier, but by and large, it sort of fits the same pattern as straight up creationism. I don't defend these forms of pseudoscience. And the reason why is because creationism tries to enter the same language game as empirical science. It is trying to compete with science as to be a theory through which we see science through. Um, you might say that MBTI and spiral dynamics sort of occupy that same space, and in certain cases, in a certain way, you might be right. But I do still think that MBTI and spiral dynamics fit the previous pattern of being some sort of organizing principle through which we can see our lives through, and maybe gives us a little bit of a different perspective in order to see things in a different way. I don't think creationism does the same. I think it's just purely trying to compete with scientific claims, and it also just purely has this air of attachment to a certain outcome, to a certain worldview about it. So I don't think all forms of pseudoscience are defensible in the same way. And creationism certainly falls under it. Whereas MBTI, spiral dynamics, even though they have they do sort of compete with direct scientific theories, particularly MBTI, because it competes with the big five as being a theory of personality. Um, uh, like but it's still, I think MBTI still has a value in it specifically, because the big five, like MBTI's big problem is that it forces uh, bimodal distributions along its dimensions. You're either an introvert or an extrovert. There's nothing in between. That's like the big problem with the MBTI. Whereas like the big five doesn't do this, and in fact, it recognizes that most people actually fall somewhere in the middle. They're not hard introverts or hard extroverts. They're somewhere in the middle there. So you can get basically a normal distribution along most of these dimensions. But MBTI has this problem, that it forces bimodal distributions, and so it's not as mathematically rigorous as other as the big five is. But I will say that MBTI it carries the function that I'm defending here, because the MBTI focuses much more on emergent effects within each personality type. Like the big five doesn't focus as much on this, and so MBTI gets an air of it's a little more intuitive and accessible to a lot of people. Because in the same way that measuring how a car works by adjusting the tire rotations and the transmission the transmission ratios and stuff like that. Very useful for an engineer, sure, but your everyday person, like viewing a car in this way is not really typically useful. A car is based on, like, the way to view a car is based off its emergent effects, the effects of a car that are greater than the sum of any of its parts. So, to everyday people, view a car as in how well does it go, how fuel efficient is it? How much is it going to cost me to operate this car? That kind of thing. Um, I think MBTI is the same way. It's each personality type has a set of behaviors that are more than just the sum of each of its dimensions, and so I think it's a little more accessible to people in this way. So I would certainly defend it under this uh, previous principle of being a specific kind of language game that has a specific kind of use. Uh, I would not do the same for creationism. Like I said, I think creationism is just holding on to a completely bunk um, way of looking at things, and tries to much more directly compete in this way. So, all right, there you have it. That's my defense of pseudoscience, or at least certain forms of it. And there you go. I hope this is an interesting argument for those of you out there who really want to poo poo it, because I know there's a lot of I would call them like naive materialists, or believers in scientism. So scientism is kind of this label, like a pejorative label that a lot of European philosophers like to give uh, to analytic philosophers who sort of worship science as like this new religion or something. That like they really overestimate how much what science can really do, is the whole theme there. So and I think there's something to that, is what I'm saying. I think there is this overestimation of what science can do, and it's very common on the internet. You'll see people like this a lot, who are very strongly atheistic and very strongly materialistic. They have a materialist epistemology and whatnot. So that's my response. So there you go. Hope it was interesting. Uh, I like it when you like it. I like it when you subscribe to it. So like and subscribe if you like this sort of content, and see you around.